newest edition of the Weichert Reports podcast. I apologize for the delay between the last one and this one, but there's been some developments going on in my personal life, all good, which is why I was unable to do this sooner. I'd like to talk a little bit about the ongoing contentious 2016 U.S. presidential election. I've been encouraged by several colleagues to do this podcast in particular, if only because they were insistent that I go on record with the fact that I have correctly been calling this ongoing campaign since pretty much the beginning. Essentially, the background was when Donald Trump announced his candidacy last year. I was finishing up a study at Oxford University, and I essentially emailed a couple friends who work in D.C. I live in D.C., and I said that don't laugh off Trump. This is real. And, of course, I was laughed out of the room. And when I came back to D.C. after I finished up a couple weeks later at Oxford, or a few months later at Oxford, I continued to be laughed out of the room when I said that Donald Trump is going to best the presumptive nominee, Jeb Bush. And then I proceeded to pretty much call every part of the primary. And there's a reason I'm bringing this up. It's because it's not really any secret how I did this. I have a background in grassroots politics. Since the age of 18, have worked on various conservative grassroots campaigns. Most recently, I worked in a very conservative congressional office. I did a lot of constituent outreach as well as some legislative stuff. But I always had my kind of finger on the pulse of the electorate, at least on the base of the Republican Party. And something that I noticed very early on was this enthusiasm for Donald Trump. It was the same kind of enthusiasm that catapulted the Tea Party to prominence 6 years ago in the 2010 midterms. And that's why I'm saying this. I'm not alone. There is a professor out there, and now I'm blanking on the name, so forgive me. I'm not that familiar with him, but he has accurately predicted every one of the presidential elections, save for 2000, based on his analysis of enthusiasm, voter enthusiasm. And so I have intuitively gone off of enthusiasm. I knew in 2008 we weren't going to win. I was dreadful of 2012 because I had this distinct feeling that we were not going to win, although I was hopeful. I am very hopeful now of the fact that I am the only one who's seriously believing, at least anyone in the policy community, who seriously thinks that Donald Trump is going to be the next president. Now, I realize that's a big statement to make, and if I'm wrong, which of course statistically, if you go off of the polls and whatnot, I am wrong, but I don't think I am. I think that there's a few reasons why I think this way, and I think that there's some quantitative reasons why as well. The first, most important, is I do believe the polls are oversampling women, and I think they're oversampling Democrats. The second thing is the aforementioned enthusiasm gap. I do not see enthusiasm on the level of Donald Trump on the level of Donald Trump for Hillary Clinton. I don't see it. It's not there. I don't know if maybe they know something that I don't know, the media, that is, but my reading of the situation is that there is a huge enthusiasm gap, and if even half of those people who are turning out for Donald Trump rallies actually end up going to the polls, Hillary Clinton's going to be in for it. There is I think a groundswell of support for Mr. Trump. And I think there's a litany of reasons. And I just heard yesterday or earlier today, the very same people on CNN, John King and Matthew Dowd at ABC and Cokie Roberts and all of these kind of, primary bigwig establishment figures in D.C., I just heard them, and over the last 72 hours, completely reverse course after an entire year of mocking Trump and saying that he doesn't stand a chance and poo-pooing his entire campaign. They're now saying there is a path to victory. Well, of course there's a path to victory. So this podcast is being assembled for a couple reasons. First is I would like to be on record with saying that I do think that Donald Trump is going to win. I think this is going to be the mother of all surprises. And I'm going to back that up also with some international trends. There is a trend going on in the world, and it has been going on for about 10 years, going back to, I guess you could really say going back to 1994. I would say, though, going back to definitely the 2000s, there's been a trend going on, a slow kind of reaction that's been bubbling to the surface since the end of the Cold War, and it's a reaction to globalization. And we see it in the Philippines with the presidency of Duerte, and I can never say his name properly, forgive me. We see it in Germany, in which the Weikert Report, I wrote an article several months ago predicting the alternative for Germany, or in German it's Alternative für Deutschland, AfD. I predicted their electoral success in their most recent elections. And the reason is because there is this reaction going on to globalization. There's this reaction going on to open borders. There's this reaction going on to globalism in general, free trade and whatnot. And we saw it with Brexit, obviously. British exit from the EU was probably, again, at the Weikert Report, I was interviewed on the Don Crow show here in D.C. Because of my predictions on this matter, and I am now going on record with saying that I believe that Donald Trump is going to win. Now, of course, who knows? I don't live by a crystal ball. I've never been one of those wizards of smart that really delves too heavily into prediction. I like to say that I am trained as someone who identifies patterns, and I can list out 2 or 3 or 4 different possible outcomes based on the patterns. But the pattern that I'm seeing here is a general trend throughout the world that's reacting to globalization, and it's coming from the right. It's a right-wing reaction. Populism, it's a populist reaction to what's going on. So, I will extrapolate from that to say that I fundamentally believe that the polls are wrong in America because of the oversampling issues, because as we saw with ABC poll recently, they're oversampling Democrats by I think 5 to 8. 5 to 8 points. They're oversampling Democrats. They're oversampling women. They're promoting in the media here anecdotal evidence of these groups of millennials, small groups, individuals and small groups of millennial Republicans, so-called, that are coming out and saying, "Oh, we're going to vote for Hillary because Donald Trump is just such a racist and a homophobe and a misogynist and any other phobia they can accuse him of having." But the fact is, I don't think that's really going to convert to what they think it's going to convert to. And so for my foreign audience, of which I know that there are more foreign audiences that are involved, that are my readers on the Weikert Report and now listeners of the Weikert Report. If foreigners listen to this, I will say that I really do believe that you should be advising your governments, particularly in Europe, to begin making calculations for your grand strategies based on a Donald Trump presidency. There has been this general assumption on the part, particularly of our NATO partners, that we don't have to think about what comes after Donald Trump winning because he's not going to win. Now, unless they have information that we don't have, which, of course, given the level of unvarnished corruption that Hillary Clinton seems to have embodied, that they could know something. They could be protecting their investment, if you'll allow me a moment of brevity. But, of course, they probably don't know for sure, but they're just assuming. And I just have to say that they shouldn't be assuming, just like they shouldn't have assumed with Brexit. I'm telling you right now, our allies need to start making calculations to preserve the alliance with the United States. And part of that's going to be, for instance, for NATO countries, you better start spending 2% GDP or make moves indicating you're willing to start giving more of your GDP toward the common defense, because there are going to be some reassessments. I don't believe the rhetoric, and I don't believe that Donald Trump is an agent of Russia, and I don't think he's going to disband NATO, but I do think he's going to reassess our relationship in a similar way that the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, began reassessing our transatlantic alliance. When former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld made his old Europe comments versus the new Europe of Eastern Europe. So I think that these leaders might want to start thinking about contingencies for planning for a Donald Trump presidency in America. Certainly my friends in Asia need to start thinking about that, because the current paradigm is not going to last. Japan and South Korea are going to have to start thinking about ways to hold up their end of the defensive alliances we have. I would hope that South Korea recognizes that sidling up to China is probably not the best solution. I don't believe that Trump is going to become a patsy of either Russia or China. I do think he is less interested in stirring the pot with those two powers, which might be for the better in terms of overall global stability. But I don't believe that he's going to somehow be a pushover for them, or he's going to be played. I think, if anything, if these stories coming out that Russia is planning a big move in Ukraine following the election in the U.S. are true, I think if these stories are true, I think that the Russians might want to seriously think twice, because I think that Donald Trump is much more so than Hillary, is the one who's going to check Putin militarily. So I would advise the Russians to seriously think twice, because regardless of how much damage they can do to us and the world, nobody should be seeking a military conflict between nuclear powers like Russia and the United States. So let's not get to that point. Let's make assessments based on the fact that Donald Trump has laid out a pretty clear vision that he does not seek hostile action with the Russians, that he is seeking for NATO partners to hold up their end. To my NATO friends, I will say we might want to look at empowering the different battle groups, regional battle groups, sub-regional battle groups, for instance, the Visegrad battle group, in terms of countering Russian revanchism in their part of the world. I also think there's going to be, for my general readers in America, I do think a Donald Trump presidency is going to indicate that we've reached the limits of this round of globalization. And the last time the limits of globalization were reached, I would say, was probably in 1913, and that led into the Great War. And 1913, I believe it was Ian Baruma, the historian, who wrote a book called Year Zero. And it was all about the year before the Great War began in 1914. And I worry that 2016 might very well be another year zero, because we have, I believe, reached the limits of this round of globalization, and there is a reaction going on. And so with these global trends, I think it is far safer to say, I feel far more comfortable saying, I believe Donald Trump is going to be president. I think for Americans, I think that what we should expect is there's probably going to be a pullback from the Fed. I don't know if that's related to a Donald Trump presidency. I have no idea if the Fed is politicized. I'm hearing things from people and from contacts that I have that there is a lot of ruminations going on within the Fed about a potential pullback, regardless of who's president. So I think that there might be a period of economic uncertainty if Donald Trump in the first months and maybe even year or two of Donald Trump's presidency. But I do believe Donald Trump economically is going to be the better president for most Americans. I think that he's going to stimulate the economy. And if this election is over the economy and security as opposed to temperament and, history-making politics, i.e. the first woman president, I really do believe that that Donald Trump is going to win. I think he's going to win. And so to my foreign audiences, I say, let's start making calculations based on that. This is not a bad thing, by the way, because I do think that if America is stronger economically, there's a lot of good we can do. I think a lot of the problems we've suffered is because America has really 8 years been in an economic malaise. We went through the Great Recession, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and now here we are going through the worst recovery in history. It's a non-recovery. Now, my leftist friends always say, well, that's because it was the worst economic recession in history or economic downturn in history, and so the recovery is going to be that much more difficult. I don't know. When Ronald Reagan took power, for his first year and a half to 2 years of office, from 1980 to almost 1982, he was also dealing with a very bad economy he inherited. And up until 2008, the Reagan downturn that he inherited from Jimmy Carter was the worst downturn since the Great Depression. And it took him about 2 years to figure out, hey, I have to do tax cuts, basically what Trump, a variation of what Trump is proposing. And shortly thereafter doing it, by 1982, from then on, the economy was unleashed as never before. As a side note, I think it is funny, cutting over to Spain, the fact that the government is essentially shut down there, that suddenly what was one of the worst performing economies in the EU is now suddenly there's been an explosion of entrepreneurship. It's one of the best, one of the biggest economies on the rise now in Europe. But that's a side note. So my point is that when you reduce regulations, when you reduce taxes on ordinary citizens, I think it really does inspire a level of entrepreneurship, which in turn I think creates economic certainty and economic prosperity, which translates into a strong national security posture. And so rather than being worried about a Donald Trump presidency, as I recently spoke to a Swiss general who indicated that they are absolutely not convinced that Donald Trump will be president, and even if he is, it would be a terrible thing. And he was a great guy. I really enjoyed talking to him. Very smart guy. But I disagreed with him on that. I actually think that an empowered American economy will be an empowered American military, which will be, by extension, a healthier, better, more stable ally for a lot of these countries. Again, don't buy into the hype that the left is selling. I do not believe that that Donald Trump is going to blow up NATO. I don't believe that he's an agent of Russia. I don't believe he's going to be a pushover for China. Not at all. I think that he is going to. I think a lot of his policies are going to actually end up bringing in a lot of things that need to be brought in terms of economic prosperity, marrying up our national security with our interests. With the old strategy of ways, ends, means, which is something that we have not done really for 16 years. So there's some positives. There are some negatives as well. I think the uncertainty that Donald Trump imbues creates a lot of friction with our allies. So one of the main reasons for this podcast, knowing that I have such a large foreign audience in kind of the inner sanctums of many governments, foreign governments, I would say, let's not let friction dominate our relations. We need to have a healthy alliance system. It's the only way we're going to overcome threats like Russia. It's the only way we're going to keep China, make it into try to, as responsible as it can be, a responsible actor on the world stage. It's the only way we're going to, prevent North Korea from going completely bonkers, and it's the only way we're going to stop Iran from going totally nuclear. So, to sum up, don't believe the conventional narrative here in the States. They've been wrong. The media has been wrong in every way possible on this election from the very beginning. Don't believe the polls. They are skewed and they are oversampled, or at least be skeptical of them. and keep an open mind about the outcome of this election, and do not be dispirited, because America, I think, with the Donald Trump presidency, far from being deranged or over the top or untethered from, healthy coexistence with our partners, I think is actually going to end up being a much more sober and reliable partner. So I would begin making at least have contingencies on hand for making strategic calculations based on a Donald Trump presidency. I appreciate your time. It's a pleasure being able to get back in on the podcasting business, as it were. I hope to do it more often now that some of the personal things have been settled. All good things. And for the Weichert Report, I'm Brandon Weichert, and this has been one of our podcasts on the presidential elections. Thank you so much for your time.